The dust on her face had turned to mud from her tears. But Natalie Crawford didn't stop running until her lungs burned so badly she thought they might split open like dried leather, left too long in the Arizona sun. She had been running for 3 weeks now, ever since the men had come to her father's ranch outside Prescott, with papers they claimed gave them ownership of everything she had left in this world. Her father had died 6 months prior, leaving her alone with debts she never knew existed, and now 5 men were hunting her across the territory because they said she owed them more than money. They said she owed them whatever they decided to take. The year was 1878, and women alone in this wilderness had fewer rights than the cattle that grazed the plains. Natalie was 22 years old, had never been more than 50 miles from the ranch where she was born, and now found herself stumbling into a town called Redemption, New Mexico, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperation that tasted like copper in her mouth. The main street stretched before her like a promise she didn't trust. False-fronted buildings lined the dirt road, their painted signs faded by wind and sun. A saloon called the Silver Dollar occupied the largest structure, its doors swinging as men wandered in and out. Across from it stood a general store, a bank that looked newer than everything else, and a livery stable where the smell of horses and hay drifted into the street. Natalie kept her head down, her dark hair tucked under a hat she had stolen from a clothesline 2 towns back. If she could just blend in, just disappear long enough to figure out where to go next, maybe she could survive another day. She was studying the general store, wondering if she could slip in and steal some bread without being noticed, when a hand clamped down on her shoulder. Natalie spun around, her heart launching itself against her ribs, and found herself staring into a weathered face she recognized. It was Pike, one of the 5 men who had been chasing her. His smile revealed teeth-stained brown from chewing tobacco. "Well now," Pike said, his fingers digging into her shoulder hard enough to bruise. "Boys are going to be real pleased I found you, Miss Crawford. We have been riding ourselves ragged looking for you." Natalie tried to jerk away, but his grip was iron. "I don't owe you anything. Those papers were fake. Judge said they were real enough. Your daddy borrowed money from Mr. Garrett, and Mr. Garrett wants his payment. Since you do not have cash, we will take it in trade." The way he said trade made Natalie's stomach turn. She had heard what happened to women who fell into debt to men like Garrett. They ended up in cribs and brothels, used until they were broken, and then discarded like trash. She would rather die than let that happen. She opened her mouth to scream, to beg for help from anyone on this street, but Pike's other hand shot up and covered her mouth. "None of that now. We are going to walk nice and quiet to where my boys are waiting, and then we are going to have us a conversation about your future." Natalie bit down hard on his palm. Pike yelped and released her mouth just long enough for her to shout, "Help! Please, someone help me!" The street had been busy with people going about their afternoon business, but at her cry, many of them suddenly found reasons to look away. A woman herding 2 children quickly pulled them into the general store. A man who had been loading supplies onto a wagon climbed up and drove away without looking back. This was frontier justice, and everyone knew better than to get involved in disputes that might end with bullets. Pike wrapped his arm around Natalie's throat, squeezing just enough to make breathing difficult. "Stupid girl. Nobody here is going to risk themselves for a debtor. Let her go." The voice came from behind them, low and steady, carrying the kind of authority that made Pike freeze. Natalie felt his grip loosen slightly as he turned them both to face whoever had spoken. The man standing 10 feet away was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out a dusty canvas coat. He wore a black hat tipped back far enough to reveal eyes the color of winter sky, pale blue and sharp. His face was tanned from years under the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he was somewhere in his late 20s. A revolver hung at his hip, the holster worn smooth from use, but his hand rested casually on his belt buckle, nowhere near the weapon. Despite this relaxed posture, something about him radiated danger. "This is not your concern, friend," Pike said, but Natalie could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "I am making it my concern," the stranger said. "The lady does not want to go with you." Pike's arm tightened around Natalie's throat again. "The lady has debts. We are here to collect." The stranger took a step closer, and Pike actually backed up, dragging Natalie with him. "How much does she owe?" "That is between her and Mr. Garrett." "How much?" The stranger's voice had dropped even lower, and now his hand did drift toward his revolver, just his fingertips brushing the grip. Pike was sweating now, drops rolling down his weathered face despite the cooling afternoon air. $5,000. Her daddy borrowed it for the ranch, and now that he is dead, the debt falls to her. 5,000. The stranger seemed to consider this. That is a lot of money, which is why we are taking her back to Mr. Garrett to work it off. No, the stranger said flatly. You are not. Pike's arm left Natalie's throat as he reached for his own gun, but he never cleared leather. The stranger moved faster than anyone Natalie had ever seen, his revolver appearing in his hand as though it had materialized there. The shot rang out, echoing between the buildings, and Pike's gun flew from his hand before he could fire. He stumbled backward, clutching his bleeding fingers. Next one goes through your skull, the stranger said, his voice still calm, still steady. Mount up and ride out. Tell Garrett that the debt is paid. The hell it is? Who do you think you are? Name is Hayes Thornton. I just bought her debt. Here. Hayes reached into his coat with his free hand and pulled out a thick fold of bills. He tossed it at Pike's feet. That is 5,000. Count it if you like, but do it somewhere else. Pike stared at the money, then at Hayes, then at Natalie. His wounded hand was still bleeding, dripping red drops into the dirt. For a moment, she thought he might actually try to draw with his left hand, but then his shoulders sagged. He knelt down, scooped up the money with his good hand, and backed toward a horse tied outside the saloon. Garrett is not going to like this, Pike said. Garrett can come talk to me about it if he has an issue. I will be right here in Redemption. Pike mounted awkwardly, cradling his injured hand, and rode out of town at a gallop. Dust rose in his wake, hanging in the golden afternoon light. Only after he disappeared did Hayes holster his revolver and turn to face Natalie fully. Are you hurt? He asked. Natalie touched her throat where Pike's arm had been. It felt tender, and she knew bruises would bloom there by morning. I am fine, but you shouldn't have done that. You do not even know me. I know you needed help, and nobody else was offering. He studied her face, and she became suddenly aware of how filthy she must look after weeks on the run. You got somewhere to stay? No. Family? Friends? No. Hayes nodded as though this was what he expected. Come on then. We need to talk about what happens next. Natalie didn't move. You paid $5,000 for my debt. That means I owe you now. We will figure it out. First, you need food and a bath. When is the last time you ate? She tried to remember. Yesterday morning, she had found some wild berries. The day before that, she had caught a fish in a stream using her bare hands. I am not hungry. Her stomach chose that moment to growl so loudly that Hayes actually smiled, transforming his serious face into something warmer. Come on. I am staying at the boarding house. Mrs. Chen, who runs it, makes the best stew in the territory. I cannot pay for a room. Did I ask you to? Hayes turned and started walking down the street. After a moment, Natalie followed because she truly did not have anywhere else to go. The boarding house was a 2-story building at the end of the main street, painted white with green shutters that had somehow stayed fresh-looking despite the harsh climate. A sign above the door read, Chen's Boarding House in neat letters. Hayes held the door open for her, and Natalie stepped into a front room that smelled like cooking meat and bread. A small Chinese woman emerged from a doorway to the left, wiping her hands on an apron. She was probably in her 40s, with her hair pulled back severely, and sharp eyes that took in Natalie's appearance in one sweeping glance. Mr. Thornton, you bring a guest. Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Crawford. She needs a room and a hot meal. Mrs. Chen looked at Natalie more carefully. She needs a bath first. I just changed the sheets upstairs. I will not have her tracking dirt into clean beds. That is fair, Hayes said. Can you heat water? Already hot. I was about to do laundry. Mrs. Chen gestured for Natalie to follow. Come, girl. We get you clean, then we feed you. Natalie glanced back at Hayes, suddenly uncertain about following this stranger woman upstairs. Hayes seemed to understand her hesitation. I will be in the dining room. Take your time. The bath was heaven. Mrs. Chen led her to a small room on the second floor where a copper tub waited and proceeded to fill it with steaming water from a kettle. She handed Natalie a bar of soap that smelled like lavender and a rough towel. You have clothes to change into? Mrs. Chen asked. No, madam, just what I'm wearing. Mrs. Chen nodded and left, closing the door behind her. Natalie stripped off her filthy dress, the one she had been wearing for weeks, and sank into the hot water. It stung the cuts and scrapes covering her legs and arms, the blisters on her feet, but she didn't care. She scrubbed until her skin was pink and raw, washing away the grime and sweat and fear. By the time she emerged from the bath, she found a simple cotton dress laid out on the narrow bed in the adjoining room. It was plain blue, a bit too large, but clean and whole. She put it on and tried to do something with her hair, combing through the tangles with her fingers until it hung in damp waves past her shoulders. When she made her way downstairs, Hayes was sitting at a long wooden table in the dining room, reading a newspaper. He looked up as she entered and nodded approvingly. "Better? Much. Thank you." Natalie sat down across from him, feeling strange in the clean dress, in this clean room, with this man who had just spent $5,000 on a stranger. Mrs. Chen appeared with 2 bowls of stew, thick with meat and vegetables, and a plate piled with fresh bread. Natalie tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but she was so hungry that she nearly wept at the first bite. The stew was rich and savory, the bread still warm from the oven. She ate until her bowl was empty, then accepted seconds when Mrs. Chen offered them. Hayes ate more slowly, watching her with those pale blue eyes. When she finally pushed away her empty bowl for the second time, he folded his newspaper and leaned back in his chair. "So," he said, "tell me how you ended up owing $5,000 to a man like Garrett." Natalie wiped her mouth with the cloth napkin Mrs. Chen had provided. "My father owned a ranch outside Prescott, cattle mostly, some horses. I grew up there, worked alongside him my whole life. He was a good man, but he was not good with money. About 2 years ago, he needed cash to buy more breeding stock. He went to the bank in Prescott, but they turned him down. Then he met a man named Garrett at a saloon." "Let me guess," Hayes said. "Garrett offered to loan him the money, no banks involved." "Exactly. My father thought it was a good deal. Garrett seemed friendly, said he understood how hard it was for ranchers to get by. They signed papers. My father got his money and bought his cattle. But when it came time to make payments, the interest was 3 times what my father remembered agreeing to. He kept paying what he could, but it was never enough." "And then your father died?" Natalie nodded, feeling the familiar ache of grief. 6 months ago, thrown from a horse, broke his neck. He died instantly." She paused, swallowing hard. "After the funeral, I tried to keep the ranch going on my own. Then Garrett showed up with 5 men and papers that said my father owed him $5,000, and since my father was dead, I owed it. He gave me 2 choices: sell the ranch to him for $200, which would not even cover a tenth of the debt, or work off what I owed in one of his establishments." Hayes' jaw tightened. "You ran." "I packed a bag and left that night. I have been moving from town to town ever since, trying to stay ahead of them. But they kept finding me. I thought maybe I could make it to California, find work there." She looked down at her hands. "I am not stupid. I knew it was a terrible plan, but I did not know what else to do." "You did the right thing by running," Hayes said. "Men like Garrett, they break women. You would not have survived 6 months in one of his brothels." The bluntness of his words should have shocked her, but Natalie appreciated his honesty. "And now I owe you $5,000 instead. We will talk about that, but first you need rest. Mrs. Chen has a room available for tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out the details." "I cannot afford a room." "I already paid for it." Natalie felt frustration building in her chest. "Why are you helping me? You do not know me. For all you know, I am lying about everything." Hayes was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "When I was 15 years old, my mother died. My father started drinking heavy, could not hold down work. We lost our house, ended up living in a tent city outside of Denver. There was a man there who owned a freight company. He found me trying to steal food from one of his wagons. Instead of having me arrested, he gave me a job, said every person deserves a chance to make things right. What happened to your father? Drank himself to death within a year. But I kept working for that freight company. The owner taught me about business, about saving money, about treating people fair. When he died, he left the company to me. I sold it 2 years ago for enough money that I will never have to worry about going hungry again." Hayes met her eyes. "I help you because somebody once helped me. Simple as that." It wasn't simple, though. Nothing about this situation was simple. But Natalie was too exhausted to argue further. Mrs. Chen showed her to a small room on the 2nd floor, simply furnished with a bed, a dresser, and a washstand. The bed had clean white sheets and a quilt that looked handmade. Natalie crawled under the covers, still wearing her borrowed dress, and fell asleep before the sun had finished setting. She woke in the darkness to the sound of men shouting outside. Heart pounding, she crept to the window and peered through the curtains. 4 riders sat on horses in the middle of the street, silhouetted against the moonlight. Even without seeing their faces clearly, she recognized them. The rest of Garrett's men had come to town. A door opened downstairs, and Hayes stepped out onto the boarding house porch. He had his gun belt strapped on, but his hands hung loose at his sides. "You boys are making a lot of noise." "Where is she?" one of the men called out. Natalie recognized the voice as belonging to Carson, the meanest of Garrett's collection of thugs. "Pike said you took her." "Pike got paid. The debt is settled." "That is not how Mr. Garrett sees it. He wants the girl." "He can want all he likes. She is not going anywhere." Carson urged his horse forward a few steps. "You think you are tough because you outdrew Pike? Pike is slow and stupid. I am neither." "I am not looking for a fight," Hayes said, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "But if you push this, you are going to get one. 4 against 1. I like those odds." 3 against 1, a new voice said. Natalie shifted position at the window and saw another man step out of the shadows near the general store. He was older than Hayes, maybe in his 40s, with a silver star pinned to his vest. The sheriff. "You boys are disturbing the peace." "This is not your business, Sheriff Walker," Carson said. "Anything that happens in my town is my business. Now, your friend Pike rode through here this afternoon with blood all over him, claiming Mr. Thornton paid off some debt. That sounds settled to me. Pike had no authority to accept payment. That is between Pike and Garrett then. The girl stays here." Sheriff Walker rested his hand on his own revolver. "You boys have 10 seconds to ride out before I start making arrests for disturbing the peace and threatening a citizen." For a long moment, nobody moved. Natalie held her breath, certain that shooting would break out and people would die because of her. Then Carson spat into the dirt and wheeled his horse around. "This is not over, Thornton. Garrett is going to hear about this, and he is going to come himself. Then we will see how tough you are." The 4 men rode out, disappearing into the darkness. Sheriff Walker approached the porch, and Hayes came down the steps to meet him. They spoke in low voices that Natalie couldn't hear, but she saw the sheriff clap Hayes on the shoulder before walking away down the street. Hayes stood on the street for several minutes after the sheriff left, looking in the direction the riders had gone. Then he went back inside. Natalie heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard him enter a room down the hall from hers. She waited until everything was quiet before returning to bed. But sleep took a long time to come. Morning brought the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Natalie dressed in the same borrowed blue dress and made her way downstairs to find Hayes and Mrs. Chen in the dining room. 2 other boarders sat at the far end of the table, miners from their look, shoveling food into their mouths without conversation. Hayes gestured for her to sit. "Sleep well?" "I heard the men last night." "Figured you might have. They are gone now." "But they will be back. That man Carson said Garrett himself would come." "Maybe." Hayes poured her a cup of coffee from the pot on the table. "We will deal with it if it happens." Mrs. Chen brought out plates loaded with bacon, eggs, and fried potatoes. Natalie ate, but the food sat heavy in her stomach. The fear that had been her constant companion for weeks had returned in full force. After breakfast, Hayes suggested they take a walk. The morning was cool, the sun just clearing the eastern hills. Redemption looked different in daylight, less threatening. They walked past the general store, the bank, the saloon. A few people were out, going about their business. Several nodded to Hayes as they passed. "You seem well known here," Natalie observed. "I have been in town for about 3 months. Came here looking for a place to settle down, maybe start a ranch of my own. I have the money for it, and the land around here is good." He glanced at her. "I could use help running it." Natalie stopped walking. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I have a proposal for you. I need someone who knows cattle and horses, someone who can work hard and help build something. You need a way to pay off your debt to me and a safe place to be. We could help each other." "You want me to work on your ranch?" "As a partner. You would have a stake in it, a share of the profits. After a few years, your debt would be paid and you would own part of the operation outright." It sounded too good to be true. "Why would you do that? You could hire regular hands for wages." "I could, but they would not have the same investment in making the place succeed. You would. Hayes started walking again, and she fell into step beside him. Besides, I like the idea of working with someone instead of just hiring people to work for me. My old boss, the one who gave me my start, he always said, the best businesses are partnerships between people who respect each other. You do not know if you respect me. We just met. You survived 3 weeks on the run with 5 men hunting you. You didn't give up, even when things were hopeless. That tells me plenty about your character. They had reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land. In the distance, mountains rose against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Hayes pointed to the west, where a valley stretched out between 2 ridges. I have my eye on a piece of property out that way. 500 acres, good water, grazing land for cattle and horses. The man who owns it now is getting too old to manage it properly and wants to sell. I could buy it outright, but I have been hesitating. Why? Because running a ranch alone is brutal work. I did not want to start something I couldn't finish. He turned to face her. With a partner, though, it becomes possible. Natalie looked out at the valley, imagining cattle dotting the hills, horses running in corrals, a house sitting in the middle of it all. It was what she had always known, what she had lost when her father died. The idea of having it again, of building something that belonged to her, made her chest ache with longing. What about Garrett? She asked quietly. What happens when he comes? We deal with it, together. You could get killed. I could get thrown from a horse and break my neck tomorrow. Life does not come with guarantees. Hayes's voice was gentle but firm. I am making you an offer, Natalie. You can accept it or not, but either way, you do not owe me anything beyond honest work. She studied his face, trying to find the catch, the hidden trap. But his pale blue eyes were steady and honest. This man had spent $5,000 to save her from a terrible fate, had stood up to armed men on her behalf, and was now offering her a future. It seemed impossible that such kindness could exist without strings attached. I accept, she said, but I want it in writing, a proper contract that says what I owe and what I will receive in return. Hayes smiled, that same transformation she had seen yesterday. That is smart. We will go to the bank this afternoon and have the manager draw up papers, everything legal and proper. They walked back to town, discussing plans for the ranch. Hayes asked her questions about cattle breeds and grazing rotation, about breaking horses and managing water resources. With each answer she gave, his respect for her knowledge seemed to grow. By the time they reached the boarding house, Natalie was feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Hayes finalized the purchase of the land, and Natalie accompanied him to see the property. The ranch was even better than she had imagined. A small but sturdy house sat on a rise overlooking the valley, built from wood and stone with a wide porch. The previous owner had left behind some furniture and equipment. There was a barn that needed repairs, corrals that needed new fencing, but the bones of a successful operation were there. They spent long days riding the property lines, identifying where work needed to be done. Hayes had money to hire help, and soon they had 3 ranch hands working on repairs. Natalie threw herself into the work with an intensity that sometimes surprised her. She helped mend fences, clean out the barn, organize the tack room. At night, she fell into bed at the boarding house so exhausted she barely had the energy to wash before sleeping. Hayes worked alongside her every day, and she found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. He was strong and capable, handling physical labor with the ease of someone who had spent years doing hard work. But he was also thoughtful, always considering the best way to approach a problem rather than just charging ahead. He treated the hired hands with respect, paying them fair wages and listening to their suggestions. And he treated Natalie as a true partner, asking her opinion on every major decision. She had never met a man quite like him. 2 weeks after they started work on the ranch, Garrett arrived in Redemption. Natalie was in town buying supplies at the general store when she saw him ride in. He was a big man, over 6 feet tall and broad across the chest, dressed in expensive clothes that looked out of place in the dusty frontier town. 2 men rode with him, both armed. They stopped in front of the saloon, and Garrett dismounted with the ease of someone used to being in control. Natalie ducked back into the general store, her heart hammering. The shopkeeper, a kindly older man named Mr. Davidson, noticed her distress. "You all right, Miss Crawford?" "That man who just rode in, his name is Garrett. He is the one who has been after me." Mr. Davidson's expression hardened. "You stay here. I will send my boy to fetch Mr. Thornton." Before Natalie could protest, Mr. Davidson's teenage son was running out the back door. Natalie positioned herself where she could see the street, but couldn't easily be seen from outside. Garrett stood on the saloon porch, looking around as though surveying property he owned. People on the street gave him a wide berth. 10 minutes later, Hayes rode into town on his gray gelding. He dismounted in front of the general store and came inside, his expression calm, but his eyes hard. "Mrs. Davidson said Garrett is here. He is at the saloon." "All right, you stay here until this is settled." "Hayes, he has 2 men with him, and probably more inside." "I know." Hayes checked his revolver, then settled his hat more firmly on his head. "But this needs to end today, one way or another." He walked out before Natalie could stop him. She pressed herself against the store window, watching as he crossed the street toward the saloon. Other townsfolk seemed to sense trouble and disappeared into buildings or down side streets. By the time Hayes reached the saloon, the street was nearly empty. Garrett saw him coming and stepped forward to the edge of the porch. Up close, Natalie could see that he was probably in his late 40s, with silver threading through his dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He looked more like a successful businessman than a predator, but Natalie knew better. "You must be Thornton," Garrett said, his voice carrying clearly. "I have heard about you." "Garrett, I figured you would show up eventually." "I am a businessman, Mr. Thornton. When someone interferes with my business, I take it personally." Garrett descended the steps slowly, his men flanking him. "You paid Pike $5,000 for a debt that was not his to sell. That was poor judgment on your part." "The money was owed. I paid it. The debt is settled." "The money was the least of what was owed. Miss Crawford stole from me." "She stole nothing. She ran from a bad situation." Garrett smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I see. You have developed feelings for the girl. That explains your poor decision-making." Hayes's expression didn't change. "Whatever is between me and Miss Crawford is none of your concern. What is your concern is that you have been paid in full. Your business with her is finished. I will decide when my business is finished." Garrett took another step forward. "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to produce Miss Crawford, and she is going to come with me. In return, I will give you back your $5,000. Everyone walks away whole." "No, no," Garrett raised his eyebrows. "You are choosing to die for a woman you barely know?" "I am choosing to stand by my word. The debt is paid. She is not going anywhere with you." The saloon doors swung open and 3 more men emerged, all armed. Along with the 2 already flanking Garrett, that made 5 against 1. Natalie felt sick with fear. Hayes was good with a gun, she had seen that, but no one was good enough to outdraw 5 men. Then Sheriff Walker appeared from the direction of his office, rifle cradled in his arms. "Afternoon, Garrett. Heard you were in town." "Sheriff, this does not concern you." "Well now, that is where you are wrong. Mr. Thornton is a citizen of redemption. Miss Crawford is a citizen of redemption. When you threaten my citizens, it becomes my concern." "I am not threatening anyone. I am simply trying to collect a debt." "Debt was paid. I witnessed the transaction myself." Garrett's pleasant expression cracked slightly. "The girl owes me more than money. What she owes you is nothing that I will allow you to collect in my town." Sheriff Walker raised the rifle slightly. "Now, you have 2 choices. You can accept that you have been paid and ride out peacefully. Or you can push this matter, in which case I will arrest you and your men for harassment and threatening behavior." "You are making a mistake." "Sheriff? Maybe, but it is my mistake to make." Sheriff Walker glanced at Hayes. "Mr. Thornton, perhaps you should collect Miss Crawford and head back to your ranch. I will handle things here." Hayes nodded and turned toward the general store. Garrett watched him go, his expression dark with anger. As Hayes reached the store entrance, Garrett called out, "This is not over, Thornton. I have a long memory and resources you cannot imagine." Hayes paused and looked back. "If you come after her again, if you come after me or anyone else in this town, I will kill you. That is not a threat. That is a promise." Then he disappeared into the store. Natalie met him at the door, and he took her arm gently. "Come on, we are leaving." They went out the back way where Hayes's horse was tied, along with the wagon Natalie had driven into town. Hayes helped her onto the wagon seat, then mounted his gelding. They left town at a steady pace, not hurrying but not dawdling either. Once they were a mile out, Natalie finally found her voice. "You could have been killed." But I was not. Hayes, I am serious. Garrett is dangerous. He is not going to let this go. Probably not. Hayes rode beside the wagon, his posture relaxed despite what had just happened. But running is not going to solve anything. You have been running for weeks, and they kept finding you. Sometimes you have to stand and fight. What if he comes to the ranch? Then we will be ready. Hayes looked at her, and his expression was fierce. I meant what I said back there. I am not going to let anyone hurt you. Not Garrett, not his men, not anyone. The intensity in his eyes made Natalie's breath catch. This man who had known her for barely 2 weeks was willing to risk his life for her. She didn't understand it, couldn't quite believe it. But she couldn't deny it either. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clop of horse hooves. The ranch came into view as they crested a rise, the house and barn sitting peacefully in the valley below. Despite the fear still churning in her gut, Natalie felt a sense of rightness. This was home now. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Over the next month, they prepared for trouble that never came. Hayes hired 2 more men, specifically choosing those with experience handling weapons in rough situations. He positioned them in shifts so someone was always watching the approaches to the ranch. He taught Natalie how to shoot properly, spending hours with her at a makeshift range behind the barn until she could hit a target with reasonable accuracy. But more than that, they worked together to build their ranch into something real. Hayes purchased 50 head of cattle and 20 horses, good stock that would form the foundation of their breeding program. Natalie took charge of the horses, using skills her father had taught her to evaluate bloodlines and temperament. They branded their stock with a simple T-bar C mark combining their initials. The work was hard, from sunrise to well past sunset most days. But it was also satisfying in a way Natalie had never experienced before. On her father's ranch, she had always been the helper, following his lead. Here, she was a true partner. Hayes consulted her on every decision, valued her input, trusted her judgment. When she suggested a better way to organize the barn, he implemented it immediately. When he proposed a rotation system for the grazing land, he asked for her modifications before finalizing the plan. They fell into an easy companionship. Breakfast together before starting work. Lunch eaten quickly in whatever part of the ranch they happened to be. Dinner back at the house while discussing the next day's tasks. Sometimes in the evenings they would sit on the porch, watching the sun set behind the western ridge, talking about their pasts or their plans for the future. Natalie learned that Hayes had spent 10 years running the freight company before selling it. He had never married, never even come close, because he had been too focused on building his business and securing his future. He had traveled extensively throughout the Western territories, seen the good and bad of frontier life, and decided he wanted something quieter for his next chapter. She told him more about her childhood, about growing up with a father who loved her, but didn't quite know what to do with a daughter. She had learned to rope and ride and brand because those were the skills needed on a ranch, not because her father had particularly wanted to teach her. After her mother died when Natalie was 10, it had been just the 2 of them, muddling through as best they could. Do you miss him? Hayes asked one evening as they sat on the porch. Every day, Natalie admitted. But I am also angry at him. If he had been more careful with money, if he had not trusted Garrett, none of this would have happened. Grief is complicated, Hayes said quietly. You can miss someone and still be angry at the choices they made. As the weeks passed, Natalie became aware of a shift in her feelings toward Hayes. It started small, a flutter in her chest when he smiled at her, a heightened awareness of his presence when he stood close. She found herself looking for excuses to work near him, to hear his voice, to see the way his eyes crinkled when something amused him. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, just the natural response to someone who had saved her life and given her a future. But that didn't explain why her heart raced when their hands accidentally touched, or why she lay awake at night, thinking about the way he had stood up to Garrett, fearless and strong. Hayes gave no indication that he felt anything similar. He was unfailingly polite, respectful to the point of formality sometimes. He never touched her unless necessary, never said anything that could be construed as flirtation. Natalie told herself this was for the best. They were business partners. Bringing romantic feelings into the situation would only complicate things. But her heart seemed to have no interest in being sensible. One afternoon in late October, they were working together to move a group of horses from one pasture to another. It should have been straightforward. but one of the young stallions decided to make trouble, breaking away from the herd and trying to jump the fence. Natalie rode to intercept him, cutting him off before he could reach the fence line. The stallion reared, and for a terrifying moment, she thought he might come down on top of her, but she kept her seat and her horse stayed steady. Hayes was there in seconds, his rope already swinging. He caught the stallion around the neck and pulled him down, then kept tension on the rope until the animal settled. The crisis passed in less than a minute, but Natalie's heart was pounding. "You all right?" Hayes asked, riding close. "I am fine. That could have gone badly." "But it did not. You handled it perfectly." There was admiration in his voice, in his eyes. "You are one hell of a horsewoman, Natalie." The way he said her name, soft and warm, made something inside her chest crack open. Before she could think better of it, before caution could stop her, she said, "Hayes, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I have feelings for you, more than just gratitude or friendship or partnership." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I know that is probably not what you want to hear. I know it complicates things, but I cannot keep pretending otherwise." Hayes stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he dismounted and came to stand beside her horse. "Natalie, get down here." She dismounted, her legs shaky, certain she had just ruined everything. Hayes stood close, closer than he ever had before, and looked down into her face. "I have been trying so hard not to feel anything for you," he said quietly. "You came to me in trouble, needing help. I did not want to be the kind of man who takes advantage of that situation. I did not want you to feel like you owed me anything beyond honest work. I do not feel that way. I know, I can see it in how you work, how you carry yourself. You are here because you choose to be, not because you feel trapped." Hayes reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "But I need you to be certain, because once I tell you how I feel, once we cross that line, there is no going back to just being partners." "I am certain," Natalie whispered. Hayes cupped her face in his hands, calloused palms rough against her skin. "I have been falling for you since the day you bit Pike's hand and screamed for help. You were terrified, but still fighting, still refusing to give up. I knew right then that you were special." Then he kissed her, and Natalie felt like she might dissolve into light. His lips were soft, gentle at first, then more insistent as she responded. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pressed herself against him, and kissed him back with all the feelings she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. "I am in love with you, Natalie Crawford, completely and utterly in love with you." "I love you too," she said, and saying it out loud felt like taking flight. "I think I have been falling for you since you faced down Pike with that gun, so calm and sure." Hayes laughed, a sound of pure joy. "So we are both fools who fell in love at first sight." "Apparently." They stood there in the middle of the pasture, holding each other while their horses grazed nearby, and the rebellious stallion watched them with wary eyes. The sun was warm on Natalie's back, the breeze carried the scent of grass and sage, and for the first time in months, she felt completely safe. That evening, Hayes proposed properly, going down on one knee on the porch while the sunset painted the sky orange and gold. He didn't have a ring yet, promised to buy her the best one he could find in Santa Fe, but he had a simple question. "Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and the person I build this life with?" Natalie pulled him to his feet and kissed him until they were both dizzy. Yes. 1,000 times. Yes. They were married 3 weeks later in Redemption's small church, with Sheriff Walker standing as Hayes' witness and Mrs. Chen as Natalie's. It was a simple ceremony, no fancy dress or elaborate reception, just two people promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. Natalie wore a new dress Mrs. Chen had helped her pick out, pale green cotton with lace at the collar. Hayes wore his best suit, dark and formal, looking handsome enough to make her heart skip. After the ceremony, they had dinner at the boarding house with their few friends in town. Mr. Davidson from the general store was there, along with his wife. A few of the ranch hands came. Even some townspeople they barely knew stopped by to offer congratulations. It seemed the story of how Hayes had saved Natalie from Garrett had spread, becoming something of a local legend. As the evening wound down and they prepared to ride back to the ranch, Sheriff Walker pulled Hayes aside. Natalie watched them talk quietly, saw the sheriff's serious expression. When Hayes returned to her side, she asked, "What was that about?" "He wanted me to know that Garrett has been asking questions. Apparently he has been hiring investigators, trying to find out everything he can about me." Fear prickled along Natalie's spine. "What kind of questions?" "Where my money came from, whether I have any vulnerabilities, who I care about." Hayes took her hand. "Walker thinks Garrett is planning something, but he does not know what. Maybe we should leave, go to California like I originally planned." "And leave our ranch? Leave everything we have built?" Hayes shook his head. "No, we are not running. This is our home, and I will defend it." They rode back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, their horses walking side by side. When they arrived, Hayes carried her over the threshold, a silly tradition that made them both laugh. The house was small but cozy, and Natalie had spent the past week making it truly theirs. Curtains on the windows, rugs on the floors, her few possessions mixed with his to create a home. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, all awkward fumbling and whispered endearments. Natalie had never been with a man before, and Hayes was patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed they would now share, and Natalie felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Hayes replied, his arm tightening around her. "Now and always." The winter passed peacefully. They worked together to keep the ranch running through snow and cold, ensuring their stock had enough food and shelter. Hayes taught Natalie to keep the books, showing her how to track expenses and income. She proved to have a good head for numbers, finding ways to cut costs without sacrificing quality. In February, Natalie realized she was pregnant. She told Hayes over breakfast one snowy morning, watching his face transform from surprise to absolute joy. He kissed her so hard she lost her breath, then insisted she stop doing any heavy work immediately. "I am pregnant, not broken," she protested. "I know that, but I am not taking any chances with you or our baby." They argued about it good-naturedly for days before reaching a compromise. Natalie would continue working, but would avoid anything too strenuous. Hayes hired another hand specifically to take over the tasks he didn't want her doing. It was sweet and slightly infuriating how protective he became. In March, Garrett finally made his move. It started with the cattle. Hayes and one of the hands discovered 20 head missing from the north pasture. The fence had been cut, and tracks led away toward the mountains. They followed the trail for miles but lost it in rocky terrain. A week later, a fire broke out in the hay barn. They caught it quickly enough to save most of the structure, but it was clearly arson. Someone had piled kindling against the wall and lit it. Then one of their horses turned up, lame, its tendon deliberately cut. Hayes reported each incident to Sheriff Walker, but there was no proof, no evidence that could tie the sabotage to anyone specific. But they all knew who was behind it. Garrett was trying to destroy them slowly, to make their ranch unsustainable. "We need to end this," Hayes said one night as they lay in bed. His hand rested on Natalie's stomach, which was just beginning to show the swell of their child. "I cannot keep living like this, wondering what he will do next, wondering if you are safe. What do you want to do?" "I want to go to Prescott, confront Garrett on his own territory, force a resolution." Natalie rolled over to face him, fear clawing at her insides. "That is exactly what he wants. He wants you to come to him where he has the advantage." "I know. But what is the alternative? Let him chip away at us until we lose everything we have built, until something happens to you or the baby." Hayes' voice was fierce. "I will not let that happen." "Then I am coming with you." "Absolutely not. You are pregnant. You are staying here where it is safe." "Nowhere is safe. You just said so yourself. And maybe Garrett needs to see me, to see that I am not some victim to be pitied, that I chose this life, that I chose you." They argued about it for 2 days before Hayes finally agreed she could come, but only if they brought 2 of their hands along, and only if she promised to stay back if trouble started. Natalie agreed to the conditions, even though she had no idea if she would actually keep that last promise when the moment came. They rode into Prescott on a warm April morning. The town was bigger than Redemption, more established, with brick buildings and wooden sidewalks. Hayes asked around and learned that Garrett ran his operations out of a large building on the main street, a combination saloon, hotel, and gambling hall called the Golden Rose. They hitched their horses outside, and Hayes told their 2 hands to stay alert. Then he and Natalie walked through the doors together. The interior was plush compared to most frontier establishments, with carpets and polished wood and gaslight fixtures. A bar ran along one wall, tables for gambling occupied the main floor, and a grand staircase led to the upper levels. Several women in bright dresses worked the room, encouraging men to drink and gamble. Natalie recognized them for what they were, the kind of women Garrett had wanted to make her. A man in a suit approached them. "Can I help you?" "We are here to see Garrett," Hayes said. "Mr. Garrett is not seeing anyone today." "He will see us." Hayes's voice carried across the room, loud enough that conversation stopped. "Tell him Hayes Thornton is here. Tell him I brought his girl." The room went silent. Every eye turned toward them. The man in the suit hesitated, then hurried up the stairs. Natalie took Hayes's hand, squeezing it tight. "Whatever happens, we face it together." "Together," Hayes agreed. Footsteps sounded on the stairs, and Garrett descended into view. He looked the same as he had in Redemption, well-dressed and controlled, but his eyes were cold with anger. "Thornton and Miss Crawford, or should I say Mrs. Thornton now? I heard you got married." Garrett reached the bottom of the stairs and crossed toward them, his movements unhurried. "You have a lot of nerve coming here." "I came to make you an offer," Hayes said. "You want money? I will give you more money. $10,000. That is twice what you claimed she owed, enough to cover any interest or fees you might invent. In exchange, you leave us alone. No more missing cattle, no more fires, no more harassment." Garrett tilted his head, studying them. $10,000 is a lot of money. "It is, and it is more than fair. But I do not want your money, Mr. Thornton. What I want is to make an example. You see, I have a reputation in this territory. When someone owes me, they pay. When someone runs from me, they suffer consequences. If I let you two ride off into the sunset without facing those consequences, every debtor in Arizona will think they can do the same." "Her father owed you money, and you have been paid twice over," Hayes said, his voice hardening. "Anything beyond that is just cruelty. Call it what you like. I call it business." Garrett gestured, and men appeared from the shadows, 6 of them, all armed. "You made a mistake coming here, Thornton. I was going to let you live, just destroy your little ranch and ruin you financially. But now that you are here, I think I will just kill you and take her. Seems simpler." Hayes moved, his hand flashing to his revolver. He was fast, faster than anyone Natalie had ever seen. But 6 against 1 was still impossible odds. He managed to shoot one of Garrett's men before the others opened fire. What happened next felt like a nightmare in slow motion. Hayes stumbled backward, blood blooming on his shirt. Natalie screamed and caught him as he fell. More shots rang out, and she realized their 2 ranch hands had burst through the door, guns blazing. The gambling hall erupted into chaos, with people diving for cover and bullets flying. Natalie pressed her hands against Hayes's chest, trying to stop the bleeding. "No, no, no. Stay with me. Please stay with me." Hayes looked up at her, his face already going pale. "Get out of here. Run. I am not leaving you." "Natalie," he coughed, and blood flecked his lips. "The baby. You have to protect the baby. You are going to protect us. We are all going to walk out of here together." But she could see the light fading from his eyes, could feel his blood soaking her dress, so much blood. She bent down and kissed him, tasting salt from her tears. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much." "Love you," Hayes breathed. "Always." Then his eyes closed, and he went still. Natalie heard a scream that might have been hers. Someone grabbed her, tried to pull her away from Hayes's body, but she fought like a wild animal. Another gunshot, very close, and the hands released her. She looked up through tears to see Garrett on the floor, a bullet hole in his forehead. Sheriff Walker stood in the doorway, rifle still raised. "Get her out of here!" Walker shouted to someone. Hands, gentler this time, lifted Natalie to her feet. One of their ranch hands, a man named Cooper, supported her as he guided her toward the door. She tried to look back, tried to see Hayes, but Cooper blocked her view. "Don't look, Mrs. Thornton. Just keep walking." They emerged into sunlight that hurt after the dimness of the gambling hall. A crowd had gathered, drawn by the sound of gunfire. Cooper got Natalie to their horses and helped her mount, then climbed on his own horse and led them out of town at a gallop. The ride back to Redemption was a blur. Natalie swayed in the saddle, aware that Cooper was keeping close in case she fell. Everything felt unreal, like she was watching herself from a great distance. Hayes was dead. The man she loved, the father of her child, was dead because of her. When they reached the ranch, Cooper helped her down and got her inside. Mrs. Chen appeared, summoned somehow, and took charge. She put Natalie to bed, brought her tea, sat with her while she sobbed. Mr. Thornton was a good man, Mrs. Chen said quietly. He loved you very much. He should not have died. He should not have gone to Prescott. He went because he loved you, because he wanted to protect you and your baby. The baby. Natalie's hands went to her stomach, to the small life growing there. She still had part of Hayes, would always have part of him in their child. The next days passed in a fog of grief. Sheriff Walker came to the ranch and explained what had happened after she left. Walker had been following them, suspecting trouble. When the shooting started, he had gone in and ended it. Garrett was dead, along with 4 of his men. The remaining 2 had been arrested. Hayes's body had been brought back to Redemption for burial. The funeral was held on a gray morning that threatened rain. It seemed like the entire town turned out to pay respects. Hayes had been in Redemption for less than a year, but he had made an impression. People spoke about his fairness, his courage, his kindness. Natalie stood by his grave and tried to find words, but there was nothing to say that could encompass what she felt. The man who had saved her, who had loved her, who had given her a future, was gone, and it was her fault. After the funeral, as people drifted away, Sheriff Walker approached her. I know this is not the time, but we need to talk about the ranch. Natalie looked at him dully. What about it? Hayes left everything to you, the land, the cattle, the house, all of it. But you cannot run it alone, not in your condition. I know. You could sell. I am sure there are buyers who would give you a fair price. Sell the ranch. Walk away from everything she and Hayes had built together. It would be the practical thing, the sensible thing. But Natalie found herself shaking her head. No, this was our dream, his and mine. I am not giving it up. Then you need help. A foreman at least, someone who can manage the hands and handle the heavy work. I will find someone. Walker nodded. If you need anything, you let me know. Hayes was a friend, and I will do what I can to honor his memory by looking after his widow. Over the following weeks, Natalie threw herself into work with a ferocity that worried everyone around her. She rode out with the hands every day, checking fences and cattle, even though her pregnancy was advancing and made the work harder. She spent her evenings going over the books, making sure every penny was accounted for. She pushed herself until exhaustion forced her to sleep, because sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant seeing Hayes alive, only to remember he was gone when she woke. Cooper, the hand who had gotten her out of Prescott, stepped up to help manage things. He was younger than Hayes, only 25, but he was smart and capable and seemed to genuinely care about keeping the ranch going. He started making decisions, asking Natalie's approval, but not bothering her with every tiny detail. In July, Mrs. Chen came to the ranch and sat Natalie down for a conversation. You are going to work yourself to death, Mrs. Chen said bluntly. And then, what happens to the baby? I am fine. You are not fine. You are grieving, and instead of letting yourself grieve, you are trying to pretend nothing happened. Natalie felt tears sting her eyes. She had barely cried since the funeral, determined to be strong. If I stop moving, if I stop working, I will fall apart. And I cannot fall apart. Hayes gave everything for this ranch, for me and the baby. I have to make it work. Mr. Thornton would not want you to destroy yourself. He would want you to take care of yourself and the baby. You did not know him. I knew him well enough. He ate at my boarding house every day for 3 months before you came to town. He talked about his dreams, about wanting to build something lasting. And after he met you, he talked about how you were the missing piece, the partner he needed. Mrs. Chen took Natalie's hand. He would want you to live, Natalie, to be happy, to raise your child in the home you built together. The tears came then. Finally, great heaving sobs that shook Natalie's whole body. Mrs. Chen held her while she cried, offering no platitudes, just steady presence. When the storm passed, Natalie felt wrung out but somehow lighter. I miss him so much, she whispered. I know, and you will always miss him, but missing him does not mean you stop living. From that day forward, Natalie tried to find a balance. She still worked on the ranch, still made the important decisions, but she let Cooper handle more of the day-to-day operations. She started eating properly, sleeping regular hours, taking care of herself for the sake of the baby. She also started talking to Hayes out loud whenever she was alone. She told him about the ranch, about how the cattle were thriving, about how she had hired a new hand who was brilliant with horses. She told him about the baby, about how strong the kicks were getting, about her hopes and fears for the future. It felt silly sometimes, talking to someone who wasn't there, but it also brought comfort. In September, as the first hints of autumn colored the leaves, Natalie went into labor. Mrs. Chen was there, along with a doctor from Redemption. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Natalie thought she might not survive it. But as dawn broke over the ranch, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The doctor placed him in her arms, and Natalie looked down at the tiny face and saw Hayes looking back at her. The baby had his father's eyes, that same pale blue, and a surprising amount of dark hair. "What will you name him?" Mrs. Chen asked. "Henry," Natalie said without hesitation. It was Hayes's full name, the one he rarely used. Henry Cooper Thornton. Little Henry proved to be a strong baby, healthy and hungry and loud. Natalie settled into motherhood with the same determination she had brought to everything else, learning through trial and error and sheer persistence. The ranch hands became surprisingly helpful, taking turns rocking the baby when Natalie needed sleep, teaching him silly songs, competing to make him smile. As the months passed and Henry grew, Natalie found herself healing in ways she hadn't thought possible. The grief was still there, would probably always be there, but it was no longer the sharp, cutting thing that made every breath hurt. She could think about Hayes now without falling apart, could remember their time together with more joy than pain. The ranch prospered. Under Cooper's management and Natalie's oversight, they expanded their herd and started earning a reputation for quality horses. Money came in steadily, and Natalie was able to hire more help, to make improvements, to invest in the future. When Henry was 2 years old, walking and talking and getting into everything, Natalie commissioned a headstone for Hayes's grave. It was carved from good granite with simple words: Hayes Thornton, beloved husband and father, 1851-1879. She brought Henry with her when it was installed, holding his small hand as they stood before his father's grave. "This is your daddy," she told him. "He was the bravest, kindest man I ever knew. He loved us more than anything." "Daddy," Henry repeated solemnly, not really understanding but knowing it was important. "That is right, and we are going to make him proud. We are going to build the best ranch in the territory, just like he wanted." Life continued to move forward. Henry grew, reaching each new milestone, and Natalie documented all of it in a journal she kept, writing letters to Hayes about their son. She never remarried, despite several offers over the years. Her heart belonged to Hayes, and she was content with that. Cooper proved to be not just a good foreman, but a true friend. He married a schoolteacher from Redemption when Henry was 4, and they built a small house on the ranch property. Their children grew up alongside Henry, a ready-made family that helped ease the loneliness. When Henry was 7, old enough to start really working on the ranch, Natalie began teaching him everything Hayes had taught her. She showed him how to evaluate cattle, how to read the land, how to manage accounts. She told him stories about his father, about the day Hayes had saved her from Pike, about how they had built the ranch together, about the love they had shared. "Your father used to say that every person deserves a chance to make things right," she told Henry one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "He lived by that belief, and it made him the man he was." "I want to be like him," Henry said seriously. "You already are. You have his eyes, his smile, his good heart." Natalie pulled her son close. "And you have his courage. Never forget that." The years rolled on. Henry grew into a young man who was indeed very much like his father, strong and capable and fair-minded. When he turned 18, Natalie made him a full partner in the ranch, just as Hayes had once made her a partner. The T-Bar C brand continued to be respected throughout the territory. Natalie was 43 when Henry married a sweet girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. The wedding was held on the ranch, under the same sky where Natalie and Hayes had said their vows so many years ago. As she watched her son pledge his love to his bride, Natalie felt Hayes's presence so strongly it made her breath catch. "I wish you were here to see this," she whispered. But in a way he was. He was in their son's face, in the ranch they had built, in every decision Natalie had made over the past 20 years. Hayes Thornton had given her everything in the short time they had together: safety, love, a future, and a family. His death had been tragic and far too soon, but the life he had given her was a gift beyond measure. When Natalie was 45, Henry and Sarah gave her a grandson. They named him Hayes, and when Natalie held the baby for the first time, she saw the continuation of a legacy. 4 generations now connected to this land, to this ranch, to the love story that had started it all. She took the baby out to Hayes's grave on a warm spring day, the kind of day that made you believe anything was possible. The headstone was weathered now, but still standing strong. "Hayes, meet your grandson," she said softly. "He has your name and your eyes, and someday, when he is old enough, I will tell him about the day you saved me, about how you faced down dangerous men without hesitation, about how you loved me so completely that you were willing to die to protect me." A breeze stirred the grass around the grave, warm and gentle. Natalie closed her eyes and felt it on her face like a caress. "I have missed you every single day," she continued. "But I did what you asked. I lived. I raised our son. I built the ranch into something amazing. And I have been happy as I could be without you." The baby in her arms stirred and made a small sound. Natalie looked down at him, at the face so much like the man she had loved, and smiled. "Thank you," she whispered to the grave. "Thank you for giving me all of this. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for our son, and now this grandson. You changed my life in every possible way, and I will love you until the day I die." She stood there a while longer, holding baby Hayes, letting the sun warm her face and the breeze dry the few tears that had escaped. Then she walked back to the ranch house, where her family was waiting. That evening, as 3 generations gathered around the dinner table, Natalie looked at the faces surrounding her and felt a profound sense of contentment. This was Hayes's legacy. Not just land and cattle, but family, love, and enduring bonds that death itself could not break. Sarah was serving dessert when Henry suddenly stood and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast to my father, Hayes Thornton, who I never got to meet but who made all of this possible, and to my mother, the strongest woman I have ever known, who turned tragedy into triumph and built something that will last for generations." Everyone raised their glasses. Natalie felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were good tears, tears of joy and gratitude. "To family," she said, "and to love that lasts forever." The years continued to flow like water. Natalie grew older, her dark hair turning silver, her face gaining lines that mapped a life fully lived. She remained active in running the ranch well into her 60s, only finally stepping back when her body insisted she slow down. Henry proved to be an excellent steward of the land, expanding the operation carefully and sustainably. He and Sarah had 3 more children, daughters who were every bit as capable as their brother. The ranch employed over 20 people at its peak, all treated fairly and paid well, continuing the principles Hayes had established. Natalie spent her later years doing what she loved most, working with horses. Even in her 70s, she could still evaluate bloodlines with an expert eye, could still gentle a nervous colt with patience and understanding. She became something of a legend in the territory, the woman who had built an empire from nothing, who had turned her husband's sacrifice into something beautiful and lasting. When Natalie was 78 years old, she fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, then turned into something more serious. The doctor came from town, shook his head gravely, and told Henry there was nothing to be done. Her heart was simply wearing out. Natalie took the news with the same practical acceptance she had brought to everything in life. She made sure her affairs were in order, that Henry and Sarah knew exactly how she wanted the ranch managed after she was gone. She spent time with each of her grandchildren, sharing stories and wisdom. She wrote letters to the great-grandchildren who were too young to remember her, leaving them pieces of herself to discover as they grew. On a morning in late spring, with the windows open and birdsong drifting in, Natalie lay in bed and felt her strength fading. Henry sat beside her, holding her hand just as she had once held his when he was a child. "I am not afraid," she told him. "I have lived a good life, a full life." "You have lived an extraordinary life," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the strongest person I have ever known. I learned from your father. He taught me that courage is not about being unafraid. It is about doing what needs to be done, even when you are terrified." Natalie squeezed his hand weakly. "Take care of this place. Take care of the family. That is all I ask. I will, I promise." As the morning sun climbed higher, filling the room with golden light, Natalie closed her eyes. Her last thoughts were of Hayes, of the day he had saved her, of the brief shining time they had together. She remembered the feel of his arms around her, the sound of his laugh, the way he had looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I am coming home," she whispered, and then, gently, peacefully, she let go. Henry sat with his mother's body for a long time, crying quietly, grieving the loss of the woman who had been his rock, his guide, his hero. But even through the grief, he felt gratitude. Natalie Crawford Thornton had been given a second chance at life by a brave cowboy who saw someone worth saving. She had taken that chance and built something remarkable, had loved deeply, had raised a family, had created a legacy. They buried her next to Hayes, the two headstones side by side overlooking the ranch they had built together. The entire town of Redemption turned out for the funeral, along with ranchers from across the territory. Person after person stood to speak about Natalie's impact on their lives, her generosity, her wisdom, her strength. When everyone else had left and only Henry remained, he knelt between his parents' graves and placed a hand on each headstone. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." The wind picked up, rustling through the grass, and Henry could have sworn he heard voices in it, his parents' voices, laughing together. He smiled through his tears and stood, looking out at the ranch spread below. Cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures. Horses ran in the corrals. The house sat solid and permanent on its rise, smoke curling from the chimney, where Sarah was cooking dinner for the family. This was the legacy of Hayes and Natalie Thornton. Not just land and cattle, not just money and success, but love transformed into permanence. A love that had survived death, that had grown and multiplied across generations, that would continue long after everyone who remembered the original story was gone. Henry walked back to the house as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Behind him, the two graves stood silent guard over the valley, two souls reunited at last, their story complete. The T-Bar C brand would endure for another 100 years, passed down through 4 more generations, always with stories about the couple who started it all. Children growing up on that ranch would hear about the woman who ran from men with claims, and the cowboy who said not anymore, "I paid what they said you owed." They would hear about love at first sight, about courage in the face of danger, about sacrifice and dedication and building something meaningful. And on quiet spring evenings, when the wind blew just right across the valley, people swore they could see 2 figures walking together on the ridge, a tall man in a black hat and a woman with dark hair, their hands joined, their love eternal. This was the story of Hayes and Natalie Thornton. It was a story of rescue and partnership, of love and loss, of triumph emerging from tragedy. It was a Wild West tale, yes, but more than that, it was a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stand up for someone else. And sometimes the most powerful force in the world is 2 people who decide to build a life together, no matter what obstacles stand in their way. Their story ended as all stories must, but the echoes of it continued forever, rippling outward through time, touching lives they would never know, inspiring courage in hearts that had not yet been born. This was the true legacy of the cowboy and the woman he saved, not just a ranch or a family name, but the enduring proof that love, real love, can change everything.